Okay, so some familiar faces, some not so much. For those that don't know me, my name's Gareth Oakes, as Bill just pointed out. I have been working, I come from the software engineering side, so I was a programmer from when I was a wee lad, and I sort of grew up hacking and things, and then became professional about 15 years ago after doing a university course in comp sci. So I come from that side of things. I've been working in e-learning and publishing for the last 15 years, many geographies as you can see there. Chief Solution Architect for GPSL, that's been for about the last 7 years. So who are GPSL, you ask? Some people know, some don't. We're quite a small niche player in the publishing industry. We deal mainly in structured content, so it's all about sort of custom solutions, heavy-duty architecture, things like that. So you can see some of the areas there: authoring, content management, publishing, delivery. We actually have a really strong heritage in print publishing, which is part of what I'm going to talk about today, actually a big part of what I'm going to talk about today. And we offer the full range of stuff. I'm not here to do the sales job on you. We are headquartered in the UK, but the more astute of you might realise I don't sound very English because I'm from Australia. Okay, so the summary here, what we're going to talk about today is automated composition. I think probably a lot of you read the material there, so I've just tried to summarise it. So what we mean by this, so you know, if you deal with production vendors and people like that, they will say they do automated composition. Everyone does automated composition, so what does this actually mean? This means truly automated, in so far no one actually touches anything. Once you've got, so the scope of what we're talking about here is once you've got an XML version of the manuscript, you click a button and you've got a PDF. And no one had to do anything. No one had to fiddle with a table, they didn't have to fix an equation, we didn't have to do any checking or quality assurance of the pages. It just came out perfectly. So that's kind of neat. The system went live a couple of years ago, so it's been in production for a while now. It's proven technology, it's working really well. As you can see down here, we're getting over 90% of articles are fully automated now. The remainder, I'll talk about how we deal with those. We are working with the ACS. This is a solution for the ACS. It's built on a number of products that we sort of integrated, did a lot of development work with the ACS on this. And we've ended up being able to handle the entire ACS journal program. So that's north of 300,000 pages a year. The workflow, I mean, a lot of people talk XML early. This is truly XML first. So the very first thing after acceptance is the manuscript goes off to a vendor and gets converted to NLM, or JATS, whichever we want to call it. So from the point of acceptance, all those manuscripts are XML. They're copy edited as XML, they're produced as XML, proofs as XML, the corrections go into XML, everything's XML, which is kind of neat. Now the big thing, obviously, if you can sort of imagine that in your minds, if that applied to you, is the reduced cost in production. And actually the really neat thing was we actually enhanced the product quality at the same time, so it's almost like the holy grail there. So just we're on the same page, this is exactly an article that's come out of that system. It's from JACS, which is a very famous journal, I'm sure a lot of you know. It's a fairly typical chemistry article here, so just wanted to give you a taste. This was all fully automated, all the tables, the float placement, all the chemical name handling, everything like that. Are there any questions? Because I'm going to go into some more detail next, but I just want to point out that I'm quite happy to do the questions as we go to save them banking up at the end. So if you do have anything, I'll try and remember after each slide to just look up and look for hands. Yes? Right, sorry, I meant the actual fully automated production. Right. So you can't have a computer copy edit. I don't think we're up to that point yet, right? Yeah, so that means the actual composition task, so there's no one in InDesign or anything like that. That's a good reminder to clarify, thanks. So the rough agenda I just want to follow over the next 20 minutes or so. I'll talk a bit about the project, a bit more detail, some of the success we enjoyed, what the solution actually looks like. I will hold a slot open at the end. We can get more detailed questions if those arise. Coffee break. Lovely. Right. So what was the project goal? Where did we start from? This is kind of paraphrasing ACS's own words to us. They said they'd like to migrate the ACS Journal's publishing environment from a manual-intensive, print-centric environment to XML-based, fully digital environment. I think that's what everyone wants or has. Eliminating all human interaction beyond the intellectually driven value-added operations, so going back to the copy editing and stuff like that. So how did this project come together? From that starting point, where did we go next? Well, when we started talking to ACS, had a very typical production environment and workflow based on heavy vendor interactions. for composition and corrections. They did already have XML set up in-house. They kind of did some tech editing in an XML world, but the rest of it went offshore, and there was a number of checkpoints where they're getting stuff to and from the vendors, which end up with approved corrections and a final article. So ACS actually approached us. We'd done a little bit of work with them on their sort of ebooks program, and they said, look, you guys seem to know what you're doing. Can you help us on journals? So that's kind of the starting point for where my company got involved. So the first thing we did is actually sat down, and we were basically asked the question, is this possible? And we said, we don't know. No one's ever done this before. We're not very good salespeople like that. We don't sort of, tell you can't have what's impossible. So we sat down and said, how's this actually going to work then, based on where we are now and where we want to get to? What's the meeting place in the middle? So we knew nothing about the ACS business at this point, so we brought the technology sort of input and the vision on that side, and ACS told us how, showed us all the workflows, I think we called the power station diagrams and all that sort of stuff. And we tried to map our way through that and see what are the points we can cross out or jump over, or how can we improve this time, So we're looking at something, I think, was about a 15 to 20 day sort of acceptance to publish, and how do we squish that right down? So a lot of envisioning, a lot of looking at workflows, and a lot of technology input to say, what can we do? And I think one of the key things, I don't know if we'll put it on the next slide or not, but one of the key things or decision points was, let's make it all XML. That's the only way we're going to get any chance of full automation. So that was sort of a key early realisation. We did run a lot of workshops with various people at ACS, business groups, IT groups, people like that. Try and discover all the requirements that feed into this and try and scope them down, which is obviously a very difficult task to come up with some sort of MVP we can launch with. And also the technology stack that's required in support of that, including custom and off-the-shelf components. Any questions on that slide so far? Okay. So who was involved? Obviously it's not just us. We did do a lot of sort of initial consultancy type activities, a solution architecture. We supplied software, or most of the software anyway. We did custom software development. We did do training on the system, and we still do ongoing technical support. ACS brought a great project management sort of governance program to that. They did all the acceptance testing, so every time we did a release, they would run it through the systems and test it for us. They did do a lot of CMS and workflow upgrades. I'll go into the solution stack later on. Of what that actually involved. Another key company we had to bring into this is Design Science, which probably a lot of you are aware of. They are probably the best software in the industry for taking MathML and composing it to something useful or readable. So we worked pretty heavily with them to sort of bring them into the fold, do a lot of upgrades on that technology to meet the needs. Chemistry equations are certainly not the worst. Tasha will back me up here. But they are significantly complicated that we need to do something special with them. And finally, obviously, there's a BPO vendors required. This is primarily for complex corrections, which can't go straight into XML because it's something like move a float over here or do something crazy with a table. Or also manual composition. So if our auto composition system generated a PDF that actually failed a quality check, then it has to go and get fixed by someone. Okay. So, the project governance, so a little bit about how the project ran. This is probably kind of boring for this audience, but some people are sort of interested in this side of things. We did an agile development, so it's weekly, check-ins and sprints of development work. Like I alluded to before, the PM and requirements management were by the ACS using a tool called HB Quality Center. So that was very important to be able to say what is the system, in terms of the scope, because with any software development project, I think I heard earlier, there's a lot of scope creep and things people like to have. So we had quite a good system for documenting everything we'd agreed to deliver and be able to prioritise it. And also, if someone said that's a neat idea, you could say, look, let's bank that, or yes, it relates to this, or it's really important. So that was a great way to sort of keep control over the scope. We use a sort of a cloud-based system called Assembler for collaboration and source code control for the actual developers to use. We were able to link ACS into that as well, so we could get the developers sort of checking in, checking out as they needed to. Comms, email, phone, and this HPQC tool I was talking about, the Quality Center, is a very important place where everyone could come together. They do have a nice setup there with multiple environments, so we could start out developing in a development environment, promote it to a UAT for acceptance testing, and then finally to production, so you can sort of control the releases that way. And we did devise an automated testing program as well, so each time we made any changes, we could rerun the sort of sample set and see if any pages got messed up. Did we screw up the tables? Are the headings all wrong? Something like that. Any questions on this sort of project side yet? No? Right, making great time here. So I'll award myself another coffee break. Yes, sir.
Was the development team co-located in the same place?
Our development team was mainly remote, although we did... Sorry, I'll just repeat the question for those who couldn't hear. James at the front asked here if our development team was co-located. The answer is it was not co-located. We worked mostly remote, but we did do a lot of on-site interaction, especially around key periods of development. We did have weekly project management calls as well as weekly developer calls, so there's 2 calls every week into the customer to keep things moving along, and we had this great set of systems to back us up for the collaboration, so that really reduced the time zone and location problems. Yes? I should probably clarify what I mean by project management because I think it means many things to many people. ACS's project management was overall, over all the team. We had our own project management function just for our development work. So like I said, there's very clear deliverables defined. We were able to track and progress against those. Does that answer your question? Great. Okay. Success. I love success, kid. Okay, so we did it. We achieved what I was calling the Holy Grail. The quality of the product was improved. We got it faster and we got it cheaper. Like I alluded to before, more than 90% of articles are now auto-composed. We do retain a vendor role for corrections and also for conversions, which is very important. I remember at the start Melissa talked about Word to XML. So at this stage, we're handling that through a vendor. So they obviously have their system set up. You throw a manuscript at them and get some XML back. There's a lot I won't talk about in that area of how you get good quality XML and all that sort of stuff. There are quite significant savings to the annual production budget in 7-figure range. And there's a greater than 20% reduction in production time. That's going from figures from a couple of years ago. They've improved since then, so it might be creeping towards 30 now. I couldn't tell you. But something interesting was the speed record that they sort of told me one time was 7 hours. So what that means is from when I had an accepted article, it happened to go to the vendor, get turned to XML, came straight back, auto-compose. You sent the proof to the author who happened to be sitting at their desk and said, actually, no corrections, okay. And then you're online. So that was quite an impressive speed record, I thought. That's obviously not the average. That's not even close to the average. The average is still, sort of a 1 to 2 week mark, but it's certainly a lot quicker. Like I said, about 20% to 30% reduction in production time. Now, what I mean by improved quality, there's many ways to measure quality. Actually, the feedback that came in from the authors after we started running the system was they really loved the improved consistency. Because you've not got, sort of different teams of people. We talked about high vendor turnover and things like that. That doesn't really play a part in the composition process anymore. The computer does exactly what it's told every time. So once you nail down the rules about this float should go here, but not if the table's at the top and all that sort of stuff, you get the same result every time. So if we measure quality by good author feedback and consistency of product without losing any of the nice professional typesetting we enjoy, then yes, we improve the quality. Are there any questions on these particular items of success? Yes.
You mentioned production being cheaper, the annual production budget being cheaper, but what's the upfront cost?
Yes.
You don't have to share that completely. But
no, I can't actually talk in actual figures, commercial and confidence and all that. There was a significant upfront cost. It's a big capital investment to set this stuff up, absolutely. But I think they got all their money back in the first year of production, so. Any further questions on this slide? I'm going to go on to the criteria for success then. So we've obviously done a lot of talking and thinking about, no one else has really done this sort of system. If you've got sort of small scale production or not very complicated journal articles, I think you can even use XSLFO and tools like this to automate production. But when you've got complicated tables and lots of figure placements, really bad equations, you really have to step up to an automated system. So how do we actually get that to work? It's not a simple thing, as Tasha pointed out. So I've started on this slide with the sort of stakeholder buy-in and management expectations. So I think ACS actually did a fantastic job internally of organising themselves, setting correct expectations with the correct levels of management. we had this concept of a no fixed deadline. I mean, obviously they had internal deadlines, but that wasn't something that got pushed down on us as a development shop. They would sort of, track and progress. Because it was agile, we were reporting weekly, and sometimes twice weekly about where we're at, so everyone could keep everyone happy, if you like. There was a great deal of transparency across business and IT. Sometimes they're like two warring factions, but they did a great job at getting everyone on the same page. We quite often had IT and business people all in the same meetings and all contributing effectively, which I think really helped. Obviously, something like this is very complicated, and like I said, vendors like us cannot possibly know everything or every nuance of a business, so it really helps having all those different inputs. And like I alluded to before, there's very strong project management at a number of levels, like I said, at sort of umbrella level over all the vendors, as well as within each vendor like ourselves. So that's sort of the setup thing. Now, the actual sort of technical criteria for success, I think the most important one that we've heard about already is standardisation. Now, what we took that to mean was not dumbing down or making everything look the same. Standardised page format essentially meant the same paper size and the same column widths. That was it. Everything else is variable. You could change out fonts and colours and all this sort of stuff about the stylistic aspects of the page. But in terms of setting the template up so the computer could automate it, that needed some sort of standard dimensions to be baked into it. So the way we addressed that is we set up a standard template according to their sort of style sheet they supplied us. We knew what XML was coming in. They have a standard JATS NLM DTD. We were able to set up that template, and then we were able to give them exceptions. So they have, at the top of their XML file, this might be getting a bit too technical, I don't know, but they have metadata fields around a journal and the document itself. We added a third type called processing meta, and that was for actual processing metadata flags. So you could say, this one needs to be green, or this one needs to be a single column, this one needs to be a double column. So all these sort of flags to the template, or options if you like, could be passed in. So it meant we were able to have a standardised template, single template. We're not having to maintain multiple code branches and all this sort of stuff. At the same time, we give all the flexibility that was required for this particular application. So that's what I mean by standardised page format, summed up in 3 words, but a little bit more to it than that. The XML content format I've already talked about a little bit, but that was stabilised quite early on. They don't really change very often. I think that's really beneficial because you would hate to be halfway through a project like this and change the entire DTD over to an upgraded version or something different. So that was probably pretty crucial. You might notice I put references on here. I thought, seeing as it's a scientific audience or production audience, you'd enjoy that. So I have got some references at the back to match those citations. They're all in order, I'll have you know. Okay, so standardised page format, standardised XML format, obviously the input and output are nice and standard. That's a really good starting place for an XML solution. We had the business all lined up, which is great. So we started with an MVP, meaning we did basically about, I think, 10 journal titles initially, the ones that were all very similar in terms of their workflow and their look and feel and the way they deal with manuscripts and things like that. And then it's kind of like a divide and conquer emerged from that, where we started with 10, and then the next group of journals are sort of, editors are sort of looking over and say, hey, I would like some of that as well. I want to get my articles out quicker. And you get a bit of a horse trading game where it's like, yeah, okay, we'll give you this option for your footnotes or endnotes, or we'll give you this option. We added one of those processing flags again and again. And eventually, most of the business is now running through the system, and then the last few holdouts, we had to sort of make some bigger compromises. But it actually worked pretty well. I think that was over a course of about 12 months, we were able to bring everyone on board using that process. There's nothing better than having a working system that people can see, right? And then they can say, I really want to that. It's not just some sort of airy-fairy stuff. I can see the benefits straight in front of me. So that really helped get everyone on board. And the final success criteria, I'd say, was using the best-in-breed software. So we use a product I think some of you are familiar with called 3B2, otherwise known as APP these days. This is really high-powered composition software, way better than XSLFO. It's as powerful as InDesign in the sort of layouts you can do, but it allows even more automation than InDesign does. We also couple that with design science software I talked about for the math handling, and they use Arbortext editor for the actual XML editing. So we've got some very powerful components linked up here. Now my next slide is going to be about the actual makeup of the solution. So is there any questions on this success criteria stuff? Or? No? I'm down to my last bit of coffee. Okay. So what does the solution look like? Okay, got about 10 minutes here, so I think we'll have time for some questions at the end too. So this is taken from a magazine article that ACS released at one of the national conferences. I just want to copy paste it here so you can hear in their own words what they saw. It's not me sort of making it up from stuff I've heard. So at the top left there, the editor accepts a paper. That's where we're starting this thought process or this part of the workflow. At that point, they're doing whatever they did before. The tech editing, we didn't change. They were already using XML to do a little bit of tech editing at this point. And the graphics processing, we didn't change. But the next bit we did change is getting that first proof out. So where it would be a 1 to 2 day lag to get something back from a vendor, now happens in 1 to 2 minutes. Also, the vendors used to do a quality checking, obviously, to verify that the composition matched requirements. That part is automated, so instead of taking days, it takes minutes. Bottom left corner now, pre-proof adjustments. So for 90% or more of the papers now, you don't need that anymore, so it saves you days on that. The author reviewing the proof, we didn't change any of that. They still got a PDF proof to look at. I don't know what I said unchanged there, because there was a small change to the corrections workflow. Previously, all corrections went to the vendor and got applied to the pages that way. As a kind of a workflow optimization, what we did is say, let's first classify the corrections. Are they simple or complex? Simple meaning I can change a few words or a heading or whatever. Complex meaning heavy-duty re-editing of this article or moving figures or tables around. So if it was simple, what we found is the same team up in the top left that can do the tech editing in Arbortext Editor can also just pop up the XML, make a change there and hit OK. And because it's automated composition, no one ever has to go back to the pages, just reproduce it. And now those changes are applied and everything lays out correctly again. For complex corrections, obviously that can't happen. So what we do then is we go back to the pages and let someone at the vendor's side, they get sent a package. Now they can actually open this up on their desktop, make all the fixes and save it again. So that works well because this 3B2 software for the composition is not only a server product, but also as a desktop product. So from the server product, we can export the pages, which actually include the XML. It's not an import-export process, it's a native XML package. So the vendor can open up that package, edit the pages, and without realizing they're actually editing the real XML, and then save it back. So then finally at the bottom right here, to make it publication ready, whatever you call it, I think they call it ASAP, as soon as publishable, so that's the first web edition that's properly published. That now takes only minutes again instead of days. So you can start to see where some of these savings are coming through because of removing these vendor processes from the equation. Any questions on what I've explained here? Yes?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you just explain a bit more about the quality checking aspect? How does that work?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. Do I have a slide on that coming up? I didn't go into detail on this one because I was trying to keep it brief. Yes, I can go into that. So this is a bit where, okay, so from the composition perspective, you get pages, and how do you know if it's a good or bad page, right? We can get people to look at it because, if you get humans trained up enough, they can look at a page and tell whether it's good or it's bad. Does it conform to the journal specifications? That's really hard for a computer to do. If anyone here has tried messing with PDF processing, it quickly gets to the realm of madness. So what we did is we took advantage of another aspect of this 3B2 system that lets us export what's called page metrics. And the page metrics file is actually an XML file, which means it's easy to process, but it doesn't reflect the original NLM at all. This XML just says, I've got a line here. It's almost like the PDF, a line of text here, a line of text here, a line of text here. I've got a float here, I've got a float there. And what we were able to do is we were able to enhance that with template logic to say, here's where the abstracts start, here's the references. So now you've got all the semantic information mixed in with the actual layout. And we feed that through Drools, which is a JBoss Java business rules processing engine. We configured hundreds of rules in there to basically say, here's all the acceptable bits. It can pick up which sort of journal it's going to handle any special style rules. And basically at the end you get a good or a bad, and it will, if it's bad, it will tell you, line 370 has this problem on this page and that sort of thing. So if you send all that in a package to the vendor, they don't even have to look through for where it's gone wrong anymore. They just read this, go to page 7 and fix the figure, So that's a real high level view, but that's kind of the essence of how it works. It really required that, being able to make that enriched page metrics from the 3B2 package. Yes? Where's the conversion? That's a good question. The conversion happens, they haven't shown it in here, have they? The conversion happens before tech editing, so after acceptance. I think they've taken it as read, or whichever article that embedded this would have said that, but once it's accepted, in a content management system, you hit the accept button, it sort of automatically generates a work package that goes out to the vendor. The vendor opens the manuscript, does whatever they do, magic as far as I'm concerned. XML comes back and then continues on there. Yes?
Did I understand you to say that ACS was already using hypertext?
In some fashion for this, yeah.
So you didn't have to train that part of the process?
Right, yeah. So we didn't have to do a lot of change management with the organisation for that piece, right, exactly. That's a good point. Yes? Oh, sorry.
Do you want to just wait for the mic for a sec, because not everybody can hear you? Hold on, Bill.
I'm sorry. Did you? That means they were using XML before this.
Yes.
To what extent was the XML the same model?
It was similar, yeah. It was like I said, it was typical vendor workflow. So the XML you got back might not exactly 100% match the pages, right? But what they would do is they would start with XML. They'd taken that leap of faith already, if you like. Instead of working on a Word manuscript, they got to XML, they had Arbortext set up, and they would do some technical, it's like tech editing, before they fed that back to the vendor.
So you updated to JAS, and did you modify JAS then?
It's still actually an older NLM DTD that they've kind of branched off, and they've added some special stuff like the processing meta and stuff like that. I think they have enough transformation set up that they can feed the archives and whatever that's needed, the proper JAT stuff. It's not a million miles away.
It's probably a silly question, but it's just a question about once they go out of the automated workflow, is the automated workflow dead? As in, if things are moved around or the complex corrections, does it always have to then?
That's a great question, and that's one of the first things we dealt with when we had our workshops. So what we do is, the concept is the authority should always be XML, right? We haven't got any Word manuscripts, so forget about that. It's always XML, but like you say, when you've got pages, what next? Luckily, because we picked this 3v2 thing, the XML is the pages. There's no import, no export, no losing attributes, no namespace problems. It is the pages. So what happens is if someone moves a figure, and that means the authority file is no longer the source XML, NLM, whatever you want to call it. The source is now a 3D file, which happens to contain the XML NLM. So it's kind of like you've got the XML and the page layout together. And that can continue through the rest of the steps as needed without divorcing one from the other. So there's only ever one source of the truth, which is kind of a neat solution to that problem.
What happens after that last piece that you have there? I mean, is there a final QC check? Does anyone resolve DOIs? I mean, and how does the file actually get published? Does the system push it?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
Okay.
It goes, so they have a documentum system for their content management. It's been customized with all that sort of stuff. So they use Adapon for delivery. So I think at that point, I don't know the workflow steps past that point really, but like you say, they're going to have to make sure everything's kosher and then push it out to the delivery platform.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the signaling between this process and the documentum system you just mentioned. I assume the 3b2 system sits on a server somewhere that's not at ACS?
They have it on a few sites actually.
Okay, so how does this workflow get tracked in the documentum system, and what is the signaling backwards and forwards and the file transfer backwards and forwards?
It's getting quite technically detailed, but basically we've got documentum hosted here and 3b2 hosted there. I believe one instance of the 3v2 stuff is actually running in the same data center. They have another one at a completely separate physical location for backup purposes. The signaling mechanism is basically a transaction XML file that says, do this, and then the 3v2 system will return a response package, which is the same transaction XML but annotated with extra information about what happened.
Thank you.
Yep.
We're going to have to move on at 3:10, so...
Yeah, I think we're running pretty close to that then. All right, well, I just had a last page. I mean, this might answer a few more questions you had anyway, but here's the components. I've just tried to list them out really quickly. So like I said, they use a customized version of Documentum for the workflow and CMS aspects. This is just production workflow. Don't ask me about peer review or anything. We didn't touch any of that stuff. Arbortext editor they use for the tech edit stage that's done in-house at ACS. They use it for simple corrections to the XML done in-house at ACS. They use something called Arbortext Publishing Engine, which is actually a big server thing that wraps up that 3b2 package. So I made a little bullet point there to point out that that is actually the vehicle for 3B2 technology in their case. And they use the 3B2 desktop, which is called APP Desktop. I think they only have 1 or 2 copies locally because most of that sits at the vendor site for doing the actual manual work that's required for those sort of 8% of cases where it's not automated. The MathFlow Equation Composer is the name of the component from Design Science that does the MathML rendering. We have a BPO vendor doing the Word to XML conversion, which we talked about, and I think I just mentioned Adapons to delivery server, and also used to host proofs for review. It's still a PDF-based proofing system there. So this is probably going a bit technical again, but some of the stuff we're proud of as software guys that we came up with, and with ACS, and it's a two-way street. We couldn't have done this all by ourselves, and ACS couldn't do it by themselves. But the really sort of key technology innovations, if you like, the first one's a table builder. Anyone that's had to deal with anything more than basic tables understands the pain in this area. We came up with a really cool algorithm where basically you get all this table data, it's in CALS format. We lay it out single column or double column or landscape and see how wide it actually formats out. So pick the best shape to start with. Then what we do is we look at the columns and basically jiggle them around until we find the best shape for all the columns. The way we do that is by assigning penalties based on the number of line breaks in each cell, and we sum that up for each column. We weight it according to whether it was a header cell or a body cell, stuff like that. So what you come up with at the end is almost like a little, I wouldn't call it a neural network, but that sort of idea where you've got all these inputs coming together to give you a result. And we've enhanced the algorithm so that it can go from single to double to landscape, depending on whether that table really didn't work well as a single column and stuff like that, whether to turn hyphenation on or off. We've got all that sort of logic in there. So it's a really complicated algorithm, but it does a fantastic job at even complex tables. So we really love that one. The Equation Composer, we can hardly take any credit for that because it's mostly design science, but we did integrate it into 3B2, which had never been done before. We did work a lot with design science to resolve a lot of the some more detailed problems, things like with that metrics file I talked about where the page can get quality checked. How do you know what happened to the equation? Was it a 2-line equation, a single line? Well, we had to work with design science to get them to feed metrics back to us. So we did kind of quite a bit of work around integrating that into the rest of the system. The automated quality check, now I'd say probably most of that work happened by ACS. We can't take credit for all that. We did work with them a lot on our side, so it's probably 50-50 split, stuff we had to innovate on our side, stuff they had to innovate on their side. But that one was really cool and saves a huge amount of time, so that's absolute necessity. What else did we work on? Automated float placement. So 3B2 does ship with a feature to place your floating objects wherever they should go. We did a lot of work to customise and configure that to suit the actual needs. Things like having figures in order, tables in order, stuff like that, which are traditionally complex problems for pagination. And finally, automated chemical name breaking. So again, we work with ACS. They know a lot about chemical names. So we let them tell us what to do there. But basically, it puts discretionary hyphens where they should go so that things will break properly. Because if you show a chemical name, especially a complex one, to a standard composition system, you probably, I don't know, anyone in chemistry will know the problem. You've got 1,3 hyphen trypto, parenthesis, something else, end parenthesis, and you've got to try and break that correctly, which is very tricky. So that was another key innovation. Right, so that's my Q&A slide. I think we're running out of time. I was going to try and fit a demo in if I could, but I'm happy to show anyone afterwards. If you want to come up and flag me down, I can run it for you really quickly.
We have just a minute for some more questions, perhaps one more question if you wish. If anybody has something interesting. We don't have anybody here, do we, from Elsevier? No, we don't, or Springer, or Wiley, and who also big publishers using systems which I shouldn't imagine are any worse than yours. And so but we have nobody here who can tell us, have we?
We haven't seen any examples. It'd be interesting to see an example of what the final thing looks like, because the problem of automatic float placement is very complex.
Yes,
and
yes, it is.
If you have a figure 1 that's single column, figure 2 is double, figure 3 is single, then you have a table. I've never seen an automated system that actually that works. So if you've got it, yours is the first one, and congratulations.
Yeah, we did a lot of work on the algorithm. There's actually, I don't think any composition package effectively implements floats the way they should work. So 3B2 does a pretty good job, better than most. So the algorithm actually has a few extra steps in it. So a situation you talked like, especially with a short article, you got floats going to the back matter and all sorts of stuff if you're not careful. So we have this system where we can backtrack for floats. We could say, okay, this float's just got all messed up. What we're going to do is anchor these floats instead of at C figure 1 or whatever, we're going to anchor it to nearest section heading. So it'll sort of artificially pull them back. And then we still run that through to quality checking to make sure that produces an acceptable output. So we can kind of do this stepping backwards and forwards to get a result. And I'd say out of the 90% automation, probably 92 or whatever it is, the remainder are probably mostly float problems because of issues like you brought up. But I was surprised we got that good, because when we started out we thought maybe we'd get 70% automation because of exactly the floats problem.
But those 90% you think, or the 70% are as good as a human would do it?
Better.
Okay, just looking, okay. I will go
okay, on this happy thought, we now, thank you so much. And Andrea.